Hello, everyone. This is chapter 18. I'm pretty sure I'm going to assign this as a kind of do on your own assignment just because this chapter is so short and we're starting to run out of time. And I won't be here for some of the classes here where I'm going to go over this. So basically, chapter 18 is only kind of one section. There's a lot more information in chapter 18, but again, I don't want to go over too much and not leave room for the other content in the last unit. So chapter 18 looks at the origin of life and just life history in general. The reason why we don't go over this in regular biology, it's pretty complex concepts, and there can be a lot of misconceptions that arise from this, and there's still a lot of research to be done here. So don't think that this is like you know hard and fast that this is the way it's going to be in the future. There's some great evidence for the stuff that we're going to talk about, but again, this is just more for AP Bio. So, the Big Bang Theory, we don't talk about, or like, I don't want you to know much about this, but basically, this is cosmic evolution. There's a great video that stated clearly does, but it's kind of funny because they think it's an explosion. It's not an explosion. It's just just a massive expansion of mass and time. So basically, what happened when the universe was first like originating or being produced is that all matter was really grouped up into a very small amount of space, and then it expanded very quickly, and that was about 13.8 billion years ago. And then what started happening is you have this condensation of atoms and molecules. Eventually, it took like billions of years for these things to happen, and then things started to condense, like planets and stuff. But basically, this is just how the universe, or what scientists has as evidence for how the universe was produced. You can see here from that time. Now we have from that Big Bang. Now we have this time and mass, and yeah, there's a lot of great videos online. I want to add to this. I don't go over this in much detail, but there's a lot of great videos online. So I would jump online and look at some videos if you want more of the physics side of this. This is a little bit beyond my understanding for physics because there's a lot about like how atoms condense, and I'm just not going to go over it in this class. But I would like you to know that the Big Bang Theory was when the Earth first originated. Now, if Earth, I should say, that's when the universe first originated. Earth didn't come about until about 4.5 billion years ago. First prokaryotic life, that's the first life in general, about 3.8. Photosynthesis started around 3.5, so a couple or million years after the first prokaryotic life. And then eukaryotic life showed about 2 billion years ago. Multicellular life didn't show up until about 600 million years ago. All right. In 1953, Miller and Yuri did an experiment to kind of mimic the atmosphere of Earth and Earth's conditions. They had a mixture of methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water, and they placed this in a closed system. They also added an electrical current, and they added some like a heat source here, boiling temperatures to mimic again. Earth was very hot this time; it had lightning strikes, so they wanted to mimic all of life's conditions to see if they could get organic molecules to form. Or if we think about it, the complexity of life is very complex. However, if we start at a very basic level and start that complexity moving up, so having the most basic or the most simplest or organic molecules evolving first and then the later steps, we can hypothesize that there is a plausibility that life evolved that way. So about after a week of having this closed system, they produce some of the amino acids and some organic molecules. When later scientists reran this experiment with more intricate and more accurate closed systems, they actually found all 20 amino acids that were found in the experiment. So proving that yes, you can from these simple conditions get organic molecules. And by organic, we're not meaning living. This is just the first stage of the monomers. You can see here all these different molecules. This is called the primordial soup hypothesis. And what happens is you just get small molecules. So all these molecules kind of working together will start to bond to each other and form these larger molecules. Now, after in the second step here, after the monomers are evolve, they're going to start forming with each other and forming larger molecules, and those are our polymers. And the RNA World Hypothesis is the idea that all life started out with RNA first, because if you look at DNA versus RNA, RNA is very complex. I'm sorry, DNA is very complex. RNA is still complex, but it's not as complex as DNA. So they think that RNA evolved first, and then DNA evolved after. The reason being is because RNA can both be an enzyme and a like inheritable factor, and so it can be passed on from generation to generation, but also do work and have function. So it kind of bridged the gap between DNA and proteins. And then after the polymers are produced, then we start seeing these protocells, and these protocells are just fluid-filled vesicles. And how the fatty acids kind of bond in water. I'm going to try to show you a video here. I don't know if it's going to pick up with the sound here, but we'll see later on when I edit the clip here. But the fatty acids, like your phospholipids, form these protocells in water naturally. And there's a really cool lab we won't be doing this year, but basically you make these protocells in lab, and you can actually view them and view the structure in lab. I did this a couple years ago, and it was an awesome lab. But again, last year we didn't do it because of COVID. This year, I don't think we're going to get around to it anyways, just because of timing. Ooh, that's the picture of the protocells, and that's what we actually produce in lab. I'm going to try to.
Chemical evolution refers to changes in things that need not be capable of reproduction. Examples could be individual molecules or entire chemical systems. A chemical system is a group of molecules that interact with each other. Molecules, structures, and chemical systems almost always evolve or change over time, but they often evolve towards simplicity. Solid iron corrodes into rust when it comes in contact with water. Proteins break down when exposed to too much heat.
Ouch!
If simple chemistry is to give rise to something advanced enough to reproduce, there must be situations in which chemical systems can grow in complexity, form new structures, and gain new functions. In order for this to happen, reproduction, which is needed in biological evolution, can be replaced with a much simpler process: repetitive production. On planet Earth and all throughout the universe, powerful natural events take place in regular cycles. The heating and then the cooling of day and night. The repetitive eruptions of volcanic geysers. The rise and then the fall of ocean tides. These events repetitively produce or give birth to new molecules and chemical systems. These products increase over time and often develop new abilities as they interact with their environment. Let's see an example of how this process works. This here is a special molecule called a fatty acid. It's a collection of carbon atoms, hydrogen atoms, and oxygen atoms all stuck together in a specific pattern. Fatty acids are one of many complex molecules that living cells use inside their bodies. They build fatty acids with atoms they get from their environment. Scientists used to think that living cells were the only things able to consistently build fatty acids, but check this out. Lab experiments have shown that if simple common gases, carbon monoxide and hydrogen, are heated up with minerals like those found in the Earth's crust, a variety of complex carbon molecules, including fatty acids, begin to grow. Living cells are not needed. This can happen naturally in underground chambers, heated by the Earth's magma. As pressure builds, these molecules can belch up into pools of water, where a simplified version of natural selection then takes over. Most particles blasted into water will either float or they will sink. Nature selects against them staying in the watery environment. Fatty acids, however, remain suspended in warm water, growing in number as the cycle repeats. When fatty acid concentrations are high enough, they bunch together, automatically self-assembling into a stable ball. This happens because water molecules are attracted to the oxygen heads of fatty acids, sort of like a magnet, but water repels their oily carbon tails. When fatty acids pass near each other, their tails are pushed together by water, eventually forming a ball. As fatty acid collections continue to increase, they join together to make large skins. If fluctuations in these skins happen to make the edges touch, water forces those edges to fuse together. The end result is a stable hollow container, similar to the membrane or skin of a living cell. These containers have a brand new ability. They can trap other molecules inside, acting as an entirely new environment for chemical evolution to continue working within. It's important to note that these membranes do not qualify as living creatures. They can't reproduce on their own the same way living cells do. That said, the development of these membranes, along with many other molecules and chemical systems that scientists have observed, demonstrate an extremely important principle. Chemical evolution can give rise to new characteristics and abilities. Because of this, scientists hypothesize that under the right circumstances, chemical evolution could give rise to systems that are fully capable of reproduction. If they are correct, this would bridge the gap between chemical evolution and biological evolution, demonstrating that chemistry can indeed give rise to life.
The last part here is the evolution of the self-replicating system, and basically, like we said before, the RNA was produced first, and because it can be a heritable factor and also conduct like protein functions. But then what we see is DNA becoming the more stable genetic material. DNA is much more resistant to mutations and damage. So over time, RNA transfers from DNA, so it's going to go DNA RNA to a protein. So that all we're saying here is some molecule had to win out of this process, and it was DNA because it's a much more stronger and resistant molecule than RNA. So you can see here the RNA World Hypothesis is what we're saying is, hey, we're going back, or RNA is going to start, and then we're going to go to more RNA. So that's the RNA World Hypothesis. It can be a protein kind of, and it can be a heritable factor. In the modern central dogma, we understand it goes DNA, RNA, protein, but it didn't originally start out like this. So showing that this is very complex, it doesn't have to evolve all at the same time. We can evolve smaller parts that then work into these larger parts later on. I do like to go over this one. This is, again, included in your book. There is the extraterrestrial origins hypothesis where life evolved somewhere else, then and then rode on a meteorite or something and came to Earth. But again, we don't know. It's still a hypothesis. This is being tested. Yeah, I just like to throw this in though. All right, Luca, this is our last universal common ancestor. This shares common ancestry with all life on Earth. And it's just, the origins of life. And it is related to all bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes. This is Luca. You can see Luca down here. We have bacteria, which we're going to talk about next week, archaea, which are very close to eukarya as well. And we're going to talk about this whole phylogenetic tree next week.